Thank you all for coming here. Does this sound okay? Doesn't really sound like me. Thank you for coming. This is the first lecture in the Grand Illuminations Speaking from the Heart series this year. And a few acknowledgments before we get going. First, I want to thank Kayla O'Keefe for the fiddle music. What's a day without some fiddle music? I also want to thank the Sisters of the Order of St. Benedict for letting us use this space. To my mind, it's my favorite space at St. Ben's, so thank you. And then this series wouldn't be possible without a generous donation from two St. John's alums, Bill Pelfrey and Steve Halverson. Bill is with us today, right here. I don't know if you want to... It's more than just the dough, though. Bill and I have been chatting about doing something like this for quite some time, and Bill is a great conversationalist. There must be some Irish in you somewhere. Our thought about this series was to not have a series that is just aimed at sort of insiders, so people who are used to talking about the humanities, used to reading things, but instead to try to hearken to the real purpose of the humanities, which is to say something meaningful about a human life and a human condition. So I hope that you'll enjoy today's lecture. I hope that you'll come to the other lectures. The point of them all is to somehow say something meaningful about living a good, decent human life. So I'm Tony Cunningham. I'm in the philosophy department. Our first speaker today doesn't really need any introduction because you're looking at him. I know in giving you the title for this talk, that this story may save your soul. I'm sure you're kind of thinking, this guy get me here under false pretenses? What kind of a story is going to save my soul? So you'll have to judge for yourself by the end whether you think I'm making good on that sort of bold claim. Before I do anything, though, about stories, I want to hit on what I take to be two elementary truths about human beings. And the first is, we become what we do. You see signs of this all the time in everyday life. All right, so if you just think of something physical, if you run and jump and kick and lift and row, your body adapts. You change. Your body, it reacts to the things that you do. And if you think about our psychology, it's the same way. So if you spend your life making sure the numbers come out right, making sure the trains go on time, making sure the forest fires are put out, it's going to affect you psychologically. In some sense, you become what you do. So that's the first thing. And the second one is, I think human beings, we are what we love. If someone were to ask you, what makes you tick? I want to understand you. What makes you tick? I think what you do is you would point to the people, the pursuits, the things that you love most. And in doing that, notice that these things don't come from reason in any sense. If you ask me why I love my wife, why I love my daughters, why I love my brothers, I'm not really going to be able to give you much of an answer other than just, I do. If you ask me smaller things, well, why do you love the Isle of Skye or chocolate gâteau? I say, I don't really know, but I do love these things. Right? I'd like you to keep those two things in the back of your mind for a little bit, because I'll come back to them, I promise. So we become what we do, and we are what we love, at least at our best. So my story for today, it's Charles Frazier's Cold Mountain. Maybe some of you have read it, maybe some of you have seen the film, but you don't need either of those things in your pocket to get what I'll chat about today. So the story has two main protagonists. One is Aydah Munro, and the other is Idman. You don't know Idman's first name, he's just Id. And Aydah Monroe is a misfit. She originally lived in Charleston with her father, who is a preacher. Even though he's a Southern preacher, he's a kind of, he has Yankee sensibilities. When he moves to the farm in the mountains of North Carolina, he has a horse named Ralph and a cow named Waldo, and there must be a chicken or some Emerson running around somewhere on the farm. In Charleston, Aydah is considered just an odd duck. I mean, even something of a monster by her peers, mainly because she turns down 2 marriage proposals at 19, and her peers think, how could you possibly do this? And she turns them down because she thought that they lacked a certain amplitude of thought and feeling. And they used too much pomatum in their hair, slicking it back. Her father moves to the mountains of North Carolina, away from Charleston, and Aydah doesn't really fit in there either. She was raised as an intellectual companion for her father, her widowed father. So she paints a little, she plays the piano a little bit, but she mostly converses with her father. Everything changes for Aydah when the war comes and her father dies. They had lived on this farm where the farm was mostly, they thought of it as atmosphere. She hasn't the foggiest idea how to meet her most basic needs. And she's penniless now, she's destitute. At one point, she thinks to herself, I want a bowl of chicken and dumplings and a peach pie, but I have no clue how one might arrive at such a thing. Fortunately for Aydah, along comes this very strange young woman, Ruby, who can neither read nor write, but she has this vast knowledge of the natural world. And so Ruby proposes a kind of partnership. She's very careful in proposing this partnership. And this is to be an equal partnership. As she puts it, we'll each be emptying our own night jars. She becomes Aydah's Yoda, if you know Star Wars, so that Aydah studies under Ruby, and it's exhausting. She wants to just paint or play a little piano, but the work is terribly, terribly difficult. And for someone who hasn't actually engaged in hard physical labor ever, it's like boot camp for her. Moreover, it's not just that it's so hard physically, it's just that there's so many things to know. Ruby knows them all, but Aydah doesn't. There's an interesting exchange in the story at one point where Ruby says to Aydah, "What do you hear?" Aydah says, "Trees." And Ruby scoffs. "Trees? Is that all you hear? Just trees? Until you can tell the difference between the wind in a poplar and an oak, you have a long way to go, girl." She sticks at it though, because Ruby won't let her fail. And gradually Aydah starts to really change. Now it's forced by happenstance, and it's not as if she knows what the result is going to be, except that she's going to be able to feed herself. But gradually she changes and starts to think that I like these changes. I'm going to read you a passage. This is a letter that she writes to Inman, who's away at war. "I cannot begin to recount all such rough work that I have done since Father died. It has changed me. It's amazing the physical alterations that can transpire in but a few months of labor. I am brown as a penny from being outdoors all day, and I'm growing somewhat ropey through the wrists and forearms. In the glass, I see a somewhat firmer face than previously, hollower under the cheekbones. And a new expression, I think, has sometimes come to occupy it. Working in the fields, there are brief times when I go totally without thought. Not one idea crosses my mind, though my senses are alert to all around me. Should a crow fly over, I mark it in all its details, but I do not seek analogy for its blackness. I know it is a type of nothing, not metaphoric, a thing unto itself without comparison. I believe these moments to be the root of my new being. You would not know it on me, for I suspect it is somehow akin to contentment. So, Aydah's story is a story that I think is a common story in life. Circumstances force her to do different things, and she doesn't know at the beginning, what's this going to mean for me? But as she immerses herself in this life on the farm with Ruby, she gradually changes. She becomes a different person, but a person she actually likes better, so that there is a symmetry between what she does and what she loves. Inman is not so lucky. He goes off to fight in the Civil War. He desires to battle gloriously for the South like many young men, but fairly quickly he realizes two things. A, he has a kind of gift for it. He's good at it. And B, he grows tired of it. He grows tired of killing and seeing people kill each other in every imaginable way. When the novel opens, Inman is in a hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. And he'll soon be sent back into action. He'd taken a neck wound, serious neck wound that he barely survived at the Battle of Petersburg. And in this passage that I want to read for you, he's thinking about a Native American friend he had back in Cold Mountain. Inman guessed Swimmer's spells were right in saying a man's spirit could be torn apart and cease, and yet his body keep on living. They could take death blows independently. He was himself a case in point, and perhaps not a rare one, for his spirit, it seemed, had been burned out of him, but he was yet walking. Feeling empty, however, as the core of a big black gum tree, feeling strange as well, for his recent experience had led him to fear that the mere existence of the Henry repeating rifle or the upper mortar made all talk of spirit immediately antique. His spirit, he feared, had been blasted away so that he had become lonesome and estranged from all around him as a sad old heron standing pointless watch in the mudflats of a pond lacking frogs. It seemed a poor swap to find that the only way one might keep from fearing death was to act numb and set apart as if dead already, with nothing much left of yourself but a hut of bones. So he makes this momentous decision. He deserts. He leaves the hospital to make his way back to Cold Mountain, North Carolina. He hopes that Aydah Monroe will be there. He hopes that she will have him. And he really hopes that he's worth having. But on that last point, he's terribly uncertain. You see, doing what he has done has made him into, he's a killer. Not for pleasure, not randomly, but he has been forged into a person who is only fully at home, it seems to him, in the world of violence. And he fears that he is, as he puts it often, ruined beyond repair. He's terribly uncertain about whether he can be you can call it a proper civilian again. Now, lots of times in popular films and some fiction, you get the impression that human beings can kill each other without it being a big thing. And in Inman's case, some might say, what's the big deal here? I mean, he only kills people who deserve killing. Adversaries in war, and also bad people. And he often goes out of his way to protect vulnerable people. So you can imagine someone perhaps who's used to seeing people in films and in stories be able to take the life of others and seem relatively unfazed. You might be tempted to say, what's troubling Inman here? those sorts of stories are just pure myth. If you actually look at the psychological data of what it does to kill other human beings, it's a completely different story. In World War II, they found that the firing rate of American GIs in combat was only 15 to 20%, meaning only 15 to 20% of soldiers in combat, American soldiers, actually fired their weapons. After the Battle of Gettysburg, they collected 27,000 loaded muskets. A lot of people were not firing their guns. The Civil War is noted for its carnage, but it was really the artillery that did it rather than the musketry. In studies looking at the weapons and the distances, the casualties should have been hundreds per minute from musket fire. It was usually 1 or 2 per minute. You know, what this says is that it's actually very difficult for most human beings to engage in the taking of another life. And this is in him. There's a discordance between what he has been doing and how he thinks of himself. His soul is in peril, if you want to call it his self, his identity. He's fearful that he has been forged into a person that he just doesn't want to be, and is doubtful about whether he would wish to burden Aydah Munro with him. He makes his way, cheating death often. It's an arduous journey. He's making his way across North Carolina. And he finally makes it. He finds Aydah Munro out hunting turkeys in trousers, of all things. And he's not sure at first whether it's Aydah, but the more he looks at her, the more he thinks, yeah, it is Aydah. I want to read you this lovely passage. They stood wary, about the number of paces apart specified for duelists, not clasping heart to heart as Inman had imagined, but armed against each other, weapons glinting hard light into the space between them. Inman studied Aydah for trickery from within himself or from the spirit world. Her face was firmer than he remembered, harder, but the more he saw, the more he believed it to be truly her, despite the unlooked-for costume. So having in the past taken up arms thoughtless to the consequences, he decided now to put them away the same. He let down his hammer and brushed his jacket and stuck the pistol under his belt. He looked her in the eyes and knew it was her and was overcome by love like ringing in his soul. He did not know what to say, so he said what his dream in the gypsy camp had told him. I've been coming to you on a hard road and I'm not letting you go. But something in him would not let him step forward to embrace her. It's not only the shotgun keeping him back. Dying was not the point. He could not step forward. He held out his empty hands, palms up at his sides. He turned back to her and held out his empty hands again and said, if I knew where to go, I'd go there. Then Aydah had only to look at his drawn face to see not a madman, but Inman. He was blasted and ravaged, worn ragged and weary and thin, but he was nevertheless Inman. Hunger sealed on his brow like a shadow over him, yearning for food, warmth, kindness. In the hollows of his eyes, she could see that the depredations of the long war and the hard road home had left his mind scoured and his heart jailed within the bars of his ribs. Tears started in her eyes, but she blinked once, and they were gone. She lowered the muzzles toward the ground and put her hammer to rest. In Aydah's company, he still has these doubts. I mean, he's overjoyed to get back to Aydah, but he's uncertain. The entire way home, he grows more and more uncertain because he feels like he's unraveling. I want to read a passage where he's trying to explain this to Aydah. After a while, Inman told her how all the way home he could think was hoping she would have him, would marry him. He had kept it in his mind and it rose up in his dreams, but now, he said, he couldn't ask her to bind herself to him, not to one disordered as he knew himself to be. I'm ruined. Beyond repair is what I fear, he said, and if so, in time we'd both be wretched and bitter. Aydah shifted and turned and looked at him over her shoulder. He had unbuttoned his collar in the warmth, and there was the white wound at his neck, others in the look of his face and in his eyes, which would not quite meet hers. She turned back around. What she thought was that cures of all sorts exist in the natural world. Its every nook and cranny apparently lay filled with physic and restorative to bind up rents from the outside. Even the most hidden root or web served some use, and there was a spirit rising from within to knit sturdy scar over the backsides of wounds. Either way, though, you had to work at it, and they'd both fail you if you doubted them too much. She'd gathered that from Ruby, at least. Finally, without looking at him, she said, I know people can be mended, not all, and some more immediately than others, but some can be. I don't see why not you. Why not me, Inman said, as if to test the thought. These are really interesting scenes because there's no doubt that Inman, he's damaged. He knows he's damaged. And what he needs most of all is to get back to Ada Monroe, but he has to watch carefully to see, do I appear to be the monster that I take myself to be through her eyes? And Aydah expressing a kind of confidence, or at least hope, that he can come back, it means the world to him. He starts to exercise his imagination that perhaps I'm not ruined beyond repair. Maybe I can come back. I want to read you another lovely passage. She fit her head under his chin, and he could feel her weight settle into him. He held tight, and words spilled out to him without prior composition. And this time, he made no effort to clamp his jaw and pinch them off. He told her about the first time he had looked at the back of her neck as she sat in the church pew, of the feeling that he had never let go to him since. He talked to her of the great waste of years between then and now, a long time gone. And it was pointless, he said, to think how those years could have been put to better use, for he could hardly have put them to worse. There was no recovering them now. You could grieve endlessly for the loss of time and for the damage done therein, for the dead and for your own lost self. But what the wisdom of the ages says is that we do well not to grieve on and on. And those old ones knew a thing or two and had some truth to tell, Inman said, for you can grieve your heart out. In the end, you are still where you were. All your grief hasn't changed a thing. What you have lost will not be returned to you. It will always be lost. You're left with only your scars to mark the void. All you can choose to do is go on or not. But if you go on, it's knowing you carry your scars with you. Nevertheless, over all those wasted years, he had held in his mind the wish to kiss her there at the back of her neck, and now he had done it. There was a redemption of some kind, he believed, in such complete fulfillment of a desire so long deferred. My favorite line in the novel. Inman, with the help of Aydah, despite this conflict between what he has done and who he takes himself to be, he recovers himself, and hope really actually does take root in him. I'll read you one more quote on Aydah and Inman. This is the clearest part of the novel in terms of Inman really being able to imagine that, yes, I think I can come back. They agreed they never gave two hoots now as to how marriages were normally conducted. They would do as they pleased and run their lives by the roll of the seasons. In autumn, the apple trees would be bright and heavy with apples, and they would hunt birds together, since Aydah had proved so successful with the turkeys. They would not hunt with a gaudy Italian piece of Monroe's, but with fine, simple shotguns they would order from England. In summer, they would catch trout with tackle from the same sporting country. They would grow old together, measuring time by the lifespans of a succession of speckled bird dogs. At some point, well past midlife, they might take up painting and get little tin boxes of watercolors. likewise from England, go on country walks, and when they saw a scene that pleased them, stop and dip cups of water from a creek and form the lines and tints on paper for future reference. Contest with each other to see which might more successfully render the scene. They could picture ships navigating the treacherous North Atlantic for some decades to come to bring them fine implements of diversion. Oh, the things they would do. Which always reminds me of Dr. Seuss. I'm going to stop with the story here. I don't want to ruin anything for you. Maybe I just did by saying that. I remember when I first read Cold Mountain, I was getting close to the end, and my wife said to me, "Did you finish? Did you finish? You're not going to like it." I've never quite forgiven her for that. Here's the moral of the story that I'm giving you here. Those two things, remember, that I mentioned. So we become what we do and we are what we love. Tread carefully in life. One needs to pay very close attention to the things that one does, lest one become something that one cannot love. In Idman's case, it's not as simple, of course, just don't do it. He's in war and he can't press a stop button. He can't just desist from this. And this is a pretty everyday quandary for many people. You are a poor single parent working a demeaning job, but you need to put food on the table for your children. That has the potential of eventually stealing your soul. Or you're a person who is systematically oppressed in life, and part of you wants to fight it with all your might, but another judicious part of yourself knows that doing so will only bring trouble on me and people I love. Or you find yourself in some kind of a chain of command, where you're forced into a situation where, in order to keep bad from going to worse, you still have to hold hands with bad so that it doesn't get worse. These sorts of situations abound, and the moral to this story fits them all. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, you agree with me. You say, I get it, don't you? Yep, that's a good point. I agree wholeheartedly with you. If you don't, we'll have time to chat, and we can chat about it. But let's just say you do. In that case, here's an interesting question. You just gave us the moral to the story. Do we really need the story? You just explained the point. Oh, sure, you read some passages and such, but you know, stories are entertaining, but can't you just get at the truth without the story? Maybe stories are just kind of decoration, adornment. I mean, after all, when you were a kid and you were learning arithmetic, you used physical objects, apples and oranges. And you eventually got past them, right? You had to. Once you started doing more complicated problems, you needed a whole lot of apples and oranges. So you only needed them when you weren't very good at it. And you can imagine perhaps someone saying, stories are like that. They're entertaining. People like them. They prefer a story to the more abstract articulation of various truths, but stories are not, they're not that big a thing. But those who say that, they're wrong. And I'm going to identify 3 things for you that I think great stories like Cold Mountain can do. They all have to do with the emotions. Right? Remember when I said at the beginning that if someone were to ask you what makes you tick, you would most likely point to the people, the pursuits, the things that you love in life. And that reason would not bring you to, we reason from the things we love, not to the things that we love. So here's the first thing that a story can do. It can sharpen our discernment of the emotions, both others' emotions and our own emotions. Now, some people are tempted to think that emotions, you're immediately aware of emotions when you have them. And that is true for certain things. If a bear comes running through that door, I'm not only going to be afraid, but I'm going to be immediately aware of being afraid. It won't be mysterious to me, right? But only those basic emotions work that way. Think of a time in your life where someone said to you, "Why are you so mad? What are you so angry about?" And you said, "I'm not angry." And maybe it takes a little bit of talking. You, I actually think you are angry. And maybe in chatting with a person, you start to realize, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I was angry and I didn't really know it. Great stories, they sharpen your ability to be able to discern the emotions that are displayed in characters in the stories. And when I say displayed, I mean not that you're told so-and-so is feeling something, but you're shown. And so you're like a detective. You're sharpening your ability to be able to discern these emotions with characters on a page. So discernment is the first thing. The second thing is that great stories give you the possibility of feeling for the characters. To see a world through the eyes of characters that maybe you could never ever see because they're so dissimilar to you. So it gives you an opportunity, particularly if you are discerning their inner life, their emotional life, to participate in that life. And it extends your sympathies for them. You know, when we're kids, most kids' stories, they're very careful about their people in the white hats and the black hats. You know, the people in the black hats are the bad guys, the people in the white hats, they're the good guys. We want to keep our good and bad people straight. When you were little, maybe you thought, my mom and daddy, they're angels. They're perfect. And then as you mature, you start to see, you know, some of the people I love are perfectly imperfect. And great stories, they give us the chance to look at characters who are flawed in certain ways, but by participating in their inner life, we can feel for them despite these flaws. The third thing, and I think this might be the easiest to overlook, but I think it might be the most important, is that great stories give you the chance to feel with characters. I'm going to read another passage for you. It's a passage about a lesser character in Cold Mountain. He's a fiddler. His name is Stavrod. He is Ruby's father. He describes himself as a bum and shoddy fiddler, which he is at first. He basically just knows some fiddle tunes to be able to perhaps get himself a drink or two for free. He knows a few simple dance tunes and nothing much other than that. But at one point, a young girl has been badly scalded, and she's dying. And her father asks Stavrod to play his fiddle for her, which he does. He can't refuse. He plays his few measly dance tunes that are completely inappropriate for the circumstances. And that's it. That's his repertoire. And she says to him, make me up one. He's never ever thought of composing a tune. And right then and there, it changes Stavrod's life. He has this profound metanoia, this complete change of heart. And here's a description of it. He had never before thought of trying to improve his playing, but now it seemed worthwhile to go at every tune as if all within earshot had been recently set afire. The music he had made up for the girl was a thing he'd played every day since, never tired of it, and in fact, believed the tune to be so inexhaustible that he could play it every day for the rest of his life, learning something new each time. His fingers had stopped the strings and his arm had drawn the bow in the shape of the tune so many times by now that he no longer thought about the playing. The notes just happened effortlessly. The tune had become a thing unto itself, a habit that served to give order and meaning to a day's end, as some might pray and others double-check the latch on the door, and yet others take a drink when night has fallen. What the music said was that there is a right way for things to be ordered, so that life might not always be just tangle and drift, but have a shape, an aim. It was a powerful argument against the notion that things just happen. When I read Cold Down the first time, and I came across this, it reminded me of one of my brothers died when I was in my first philosophy job. And I spent the last night of his life trying to ease his passing. And I felt so moved by this passage that I decided right then and there, I'm going to take up the fiddle. I was 40 years old by the time I actually got around to taking up the fiddle. But it was this scene. And the thought of Stavra trying to ease this young girl's passage, and my own experience with my brother, that led me to doing this. You know, the Greeks have this idea of catharsis. And if you've heard the term, you may identify it with a kind of purging or letting go of emotions. Actually, I don't think that's the best way of thinking about catharsis. I like to think of catharsis as it's an education or a cultivation of the emotions. My point here is that, and I know this might sound odd, but I think reading the right kind of stories can call out emotions in us in such a way that you could say, you can actually read for life in some sense. The great novelist Henry James, writing about fiction, said, we must become people on whom nothing is lost. I think that's true. And I would actually say we must become people who feel the same way. And I think one of the things that great literature can do for a person is, again, these three things. It can help you discern the interior life of complex characters, which can actually help you to discern your own interior life. It can give you an opportunity to feel for people, perhaps people who are entirely unlike you, opening up horizons that you could never get to on your own. And lastly, it can cultivate a rich capacity to feel deeply. I don't mean that reading books should replace life, but there are some nice things about a book like Cold Mountain or any great novel, because sometimes things happen to us in life, and they happen so quickly. It's so chaotic. It's all a blur. Even though it happened to you, you can hardly describe it. And yet you read a lovely novel, and you have both this combination of attachment and a certain level of detachment, where you can, if it gets to be too much, you can step back and you can go again and again and again to it. And it's a way of, in a sense, teaching yourself to feel and to feel deeply. I hope in life and in literature that you feel deeply. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks.